I'm Amy Ronshausen. I'm Amy Ronshausen, the Executive Director of Drug-Free America Foundation and the International President of the World Federation Against Drugs. Today, I have the great honor of acting as your moderator for this side event titled People in Recovery and Stigma, Barriers and Strengths in Their Pathways. A special thank you to CCAD, who has arranged interpretation in English, Spanish, and Italian for this event, and attendees can activate their preference in the menu. Today's event is organized by the San Patriano Foundation with support from Italy, Aspire Drug and Alcohol Service Doncaster, Drug-Free America Foundation, URAD, the Executive Secretariat of Inter-American Drug Abuse Control Commission, the Secretariat for Multidimensional Security for the Organization of American States, the NHS Addictions Provider Alliance, Celebrate Recovery, World Federation Against Drugs, and the University of Derby. A wonderful group of organizations. We will start the event with short introductory remarks from three very honored guests. The first will be from Fabiano Dadone, Minister of Youth Policies in Italy, who was not able to join us, but sent in a video.
Buongiorno a tutti, è un piacere mandarvi questo video di saluto. Prima di entrare nel merito del mio intervento vorrei rivolgere un pensiero in termini di solidarietà alla popolazione ucraina che oggi si vede ancora aggredita da parte della Russia, una vicinanza a tutte le vittime e a tutto il popolo ucraino in questo momento internazionale molto delicato. Venendo al tema del Side Event di oggi, vorrei partire dai dati che ci forniscono proprio le Nazioni Unite nel 2021. Oggi sono 36,3 milioni le persone che soffrono di dipendenza da sostanze stupefacenti, con un impatto che è importante non soltanto in termini di collettività e di benessere di tutta la società, ma con un impatto che riguarda la salute pubblica, con degli effetti in termini diretti per quel che riguarda chiaramente i decessi dati dall'overdose, che in termini di danni collaterali. Eppure sappiamo che nel mondo soltanto 1 su 8 delle persone che fa utilizzo di sostanze stupefacenti ogni anno accede a un trattamento sanitario, con delle percentuali purtroppo molto basse, soprattutto per quel che riguarda la popolazione femminile. Il compito delle autorità pubbliche è quello di riuscire a garantire il diritto alla salute di tutti i cittadini e quindi anche la possibilità di fare un accesso che sia agevole a quelli che sono i servizi pubblici per chiunque ne abbia bisogno. L'Italia in questo settore ha fatto dei grandi passi avanti, soprattutto dagli anni 70 in poi. Oggi contiamo circa 600 strutture in termini di servizi pubblici che si occupano di dipendenze sul territorio nazionale e 800 centri del privato sociale accreditati presenti su tutto il territorio italiano. È un risultato di cui andiamo orgogliosi perché è indubbiamente importante ed è, come dicevo prima, un grande passo avanti rispetto ad anni fa. Tuttavia la disponibilità della presenza di questo servizio richiede un ulteriore abbattimento di un muro, che è quello culturale, che riguarda principalmente la stigma sociale. È una tematica importante e delicata che è stata anche oggetto in discussione in termini di conferenza nazionale sulle dipendenze che si è tenuta nel 2021 a Genova, dopo 12 anni che in Italia non si discuteva purtroppo di questo tema. Si è proprio partiti da qui, dalla stigma e dal segno che purtroppo le persone che fanno uso di sostanze si vedono addosso da parte di un sistema che non riesce, di un sistema di collettività che non riesce ad accoglierli, a comprendere la condizione nella quale si trovino, e questo tipo di muro e di barriera rischia di far sì che queste persone non riescano a fare accesso in maniera adeguata alle cure, principalmente per timore. Il timore spinge a non vederli presentarsi presso le strutture sanitarie, ma anche presso le strutture del privato sociale accreditate. Allora dobbiamo implementare momenti importanti di discussione come questa, ma anche quelli che partano dal basso, dalla società civile, per portarli fino nelle sale delle autorità politiche, per sensibilizzare tutti rispetto al fatto che il primo muro da abbattere è quello culturale, rispetto all'esigenza di non porre un accento, un segno sulle persone che compiono un'attività che può essere vista come un errore in base a un approccio, a un punto di vista, che può essere quello, per esempio, che le politiche proibizioniste hanno posto, ma guardare al fatto che queste persone hanno bisogno di essere accolte da un sistema sanitario che li sappia intercettare e sappia capire i propri bisogni, ma anche da una collettività che sia in grado di permettergli un reingresso in società che sia un reingresso sereno. Detto questo, vi auguro un buon lavoro, una proficua discussione. Grazie.
Great, thank you so much, Minister, for participating with us, although you couldn't be here in person, and thank you for those inspiring words. Next, we will have remarks from Ambassador Adam Nam, Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Drug Abuse Control Commission, CCAD OAS.
Thank you very much, Amy. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Adam Nam, and I serve as Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Drug Abuse Control Commission, known by its Spanish language acronym CCAD. CCAD is the consultative and advisory body of the Organization of American States, or OAS, on the drug issue. It serves as a forum for OAS member states to discuss and find solutions to the drug problem, and provides them technical assistance to increase their capacity to counter the drug problem. I'm very pleased to participate in this side event on people in recovery and stigma, organized by the San Patrignano Foundation and co-sponsored by the Permanent Mission of Italy in Vienna, and doubly pleased to be joined by such distinguished colleagues as Ms. Fabiana Dadone, Minister for Youth Policies of Italy, and mental health advocate and former US Congressional Representative Patrick Kennedy. We at CCAD are pleased to continue our cooperation, our strong cooperation with the San Patrignano Foundation and the government of Italy in the joint implementation of the project entitled Strengthening Therapeutic Communities and Treatment Centers in Latin America and the Caribbean, known by its Spanish language acronym FOCTALI, which is currently in its second phase. This side event will address key issues regarding drug demand reduction, such as recovery and stigma, taking into account that the world continues to face the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has had a profoundly negative effect on pre-existing mental health conditions and disorders related to psychoactive substance use. The pandemic has resulted in relapses and other setbacks, the results of difficulties in accessing mental health care and treatment services. Stigma is an issue of high relevance for OAS member states. The OAS Hemispheric Drug Strategy and its corresponding Plan of Action 2021 to 2025, approved by consensus in December 2020 at the 68th regular session of CCAD, both include as a central tenet of demand reduction the need to address stigmatization, exclusion, and social marginalization associated with substance use disorders, which prevent individuals from seeking, accessing, and/or completing drug demand reduction services. CCAD has undertaken several actions regarding stigma. In September of last year, CCAD held an online course for health professionals entitled Stigma and Mental Health Challenges to Building Quality Care. In November of last year, in coordination with the University of North Dakota in the United States, we developed a training course entitled Addressing Stigma and Substance Use Disorders. And in February of this year, CCAD held a webinar entitled Addressing and Preventing Stigmatization of Users of Psychoactive Substances Through Social and Healthcare Services in coordination with the Pan American Health Organization and the municipality of Valencia, Spain. All this to say that CCAD is with all of you in the effort to address stigma, promote social inclusion, and facilitate interventions to support people with drug dependence disorder on their paths to recovery. Finally, I want to recognize the participation in this side event of Jimena Kalowski, Chief of CCAD's Demand Reduction Unit, and I thank all of you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all of the things that you guys do for us around the world. It's so relevant, and it's, being able to collaborate and have that support is just really amazing. So thank you so much. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Patrick J. Kennedy, former U.S. Congressman, founder of the Kennedy Forum, and co-founder of One Mind. Oh, Patrick, I believe you're muted.
That'll be the famous phrase coming out of COVID, right? Let me just thank all of you. I'm so grateful to be with my fellow advocates from around the world, seeking to try to end the stigma against this illness that affects all of us directly, like myself, who has suffered from addiction, but my family who's suffered from addiction, and so many of the people in my life and everybody I know has a story in their family of someone. And none of us in our families, if one person suffers, we don't all suffer. And so I really appreciate you bringing out into the light the need to finally treat this illness as the brain illness that it is. When I wrote my book after leaving the United States Congress, I called it A Common Struggle. And of course, most people said, what is so common about being with a story that's like a Kennedy? Your uncle was president of the United States. Your other uncle was Robert Kennedy. Your father was a premier United States senator. How can that be common to anyone else? And what I wrote about is that what was common was the silence in my family around talking about these issues. That silence, we were sworn to secrecy in my family, because to have an addiction was to have a moral failing as opposed to a medical failing. And being in politics, we were subject to political attack if we had personal failings. It would somehow make us less able to do the job of being in political life and in government. I have been honored because my struggle with addiction made me, as a member of Congress, a champion to try to end stigma. But what I would love to leave with this group is that we define stigma in a different way. We said stigma was discrimination. And my uncle was the first president to speak out against civil rights as a United States president. And he talked about the treatment of African Americans and other communities of color as immoral, that we had a separate and unequal system in the United States when considering all Americans as equal. And I framed our struggle to address the stigma of mental illness and addiction as a medical version of civil rights. I said, no longer in healthcare and in medicine should we treat this illness of the brain as something other than what it is, a medical illness, a brain illness. Now, I know today we're going to be talking about, sobriety and equity and so many things about social capital and capital in terms of recovery capital. But let me say that I thought that framing this in terms of adequate reimbursement to treat addiction, just like we would treat diabetes, just like we would treat cardiovascular disease, we can measure that in my country. And of course, we don't comply. My country doesn't pay people who treat the disease of addiction the same way we treat people who treat asthma and cardiovascular disease and diabetes, other chronic illnesses. And so our struggle in the United States is to try to build the comparative of how we treat these illnesses with other illnesses. That's how we show discrimination, because most people still don't like us. These diseases still are shamed and people have a bias. But what everyone feels is wrong is discrimination. So I think if we frame this in the face of this is discriminatory, the natural human response is discrimination and bigotry is wrong. And we have used that sense of injustice to propel our movement. In my own case of recovery, however, my recovery has not been just because it's medical. I have been afforded good medical treatment, good psychiatry and psychology. But what has made the substantive difference in my being able to say I have a recovery and not had to use any drugs or mind-altering substances since February 22nd, 2011. I can say I'm a person in long-term recovery because I have a recovery system, which means I have peers who, like myself, struggle each day to get into recovery and maintain that recovery. And I meet with them every day. That helps stabilize me. I also have an incredible spouse who is in recovery with me, who supports my recovery. I have 5 beautiful children who take me out of my own problems and make me focus on theirs, which saves my life. And finally, I have the opportunity to join all of you, which reminds me that I should not regret my past as someone who struggled with addiction, but I should use my past to help others. And that the way that I have purpose in my life is the way that I continue to maintain my sobriety. And you all today have given me an opportunity to be of service. And when I'm of service, I have a better chance just for today of being in recovery. So I thank you all for this opportunity, and I wish this panel well, and thank you all for the work that all of you are doing around the world. We all are common in our struggle to overcome this not only deadly disease, but this stigmatizing disease.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you for bringing up family and the importance of this being a whole family issue and disease. And thank you for being a champion of recovery, a champion of reducing stigma, and like you brought up, it's very important being a champion of parity so that we can get this treated like every other disease. Thank you so much. Now it's time to start our panel. In this panel, we have speakers from all over the world with different and significant backgrounds who will present lived experiences and studies concerning stigma and the social inclusion of people in recovery, while analyzing what kind of interventions can really support people in their path to recovery. We have 6 panelists, so in the interest of hearing from them and not from me, I will introduce them each by name and organization only, and I'll share their short bios in the chat. Speaking of the chat, please feel free to use this to tell us where you're logging in from today and say hello. And if you have any questions for the panelists, if you could put them in the Q&A box, it'll be a little bit easier to track them there. So let's get started with the panel. Our first presenter is Neil Furbank from Aspire in the UK.
Hi there. Thank you. And you know, what speeches to follow. I feel really, really nervous now. Kind of, they were great acts to follow, but I feel really honoured to be here today. I am a person in long-term recovery. I work for Aspire within Doncaster, the UK, but really I'm here to talk to you about the recovery games and how we've used that in our very small part of the UK to tackle stigma. The idea really kind of came from the people that we was working with felt ostracized from the communities that they were once very much part of. As we all know, you know, people get well in communities, not in services. And not only were they affected themselves, but their family members, you know, their partners, their children, they didn't feel no longer part of that community because of the act of one person. So, you know, we got our heads together, we came up with an event where if we felt not welcome to the community events that were already provided, we would put on our own and attract that community to us. So we put on the loudest, the craziest, the most chaotic, colorful event that we could think of, which started off as the Recovery Games. Very local event, 300 attended at the first event. It is now UK-wide, and we have over 1,000 competitors actually join us each year. Now, I can talk forever about this event, but I would really like to take this time to actually show you a video and hear from some of the participants what this type of event means for themselves. So hope you enjoy.
Get a team and come, it's brilliant. It's what recovery is all about, and dancing in colours is fantastic. Every day you should be dancing in colours.
The energy is absolutely fantastic here. If you're not in recovery, get in recovery because it's absolutely brilliant.
I like being around the whole family, and I liked playing on all the fun games.
Fab day though, it's brilliant. So thank you very much to the Mayor and Mayoress. More of this, then more people can keep sober and clean, because we're losing friends.
Even with weather?
Rain? No, is it? It's better than what I used to do.
That's filling up, you know.
I know. Yeah, but the last time I had a cup like this, it was, I've got to change. I don't do that anymore. This is so much better, and I talk a lot.
Okay, thank you for watching that. Those happy smiley faces say it all for me every single time. The event really has grown. There is a beautiful story that lasts with me forever of a lovely old lady that was wandering through one day. She stumbled across our event, and this really sums up kind of what the event does. And she pulled me to one side and said, "Can I ask what this is about?" And I told her it was about people in recovery from substance misuse. She became guarded. Her handbag came up to her chin. It's like, "Oh my God, where are they all?" It's like, "You won't know. You're surrounded by people." That is amazing. And she continues to come now each year. So we've broke down those barriers in those communities. You really can't escape the color, the vibrant, the noise. It's just beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. And that's thank you all from me. Thanks for your time.
Wow, thank you so much, Neil. That was amazing. I put in my vote now for our next field trip to be to the recovery games. It looks so much fun. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it might be my favorite video of all of CND this year. Thank you. Next, we have up Monica Brisante from San Patriano in Italy.
Thank you, Amy. And let me take a few seconds to thank all the speakers in this panel and all those who gave the opening remarks, such as Minister Dadone, Ambassador Nam, and Patrick, because your contribution were really amazing. And I would add that there couldn't be any better way to start this panel with this video of smiling faces of recovery. This was a wonderful video, and thanks for sharing that, Neil. Now I start my presentation, sharing my, okay. So it is very quick. Oh, doesn't move. Sorry. Okay. So we all know the substance use disorder ranked first among the most stigmatized condition. It is easy to understand why. It is associated with blame, with no way out, with negative prognosis about possibility of recovery, and with social dangerousness. People are perceived as dangerous for society. This brings, of course, to social exclusion, and this social exclusion is concrete with barriers to housing, employment, access to education, and in particular to care and services, which is a huge problem for those who need most care and services. Also, families of people with substance use disorder are stigmatized and involved in this blame. They are blamed for their loved one issue, and they feel helpless and hopeless. And this is another important issue that we should care about. So I would like to concentrate a little bit about self-stigma, which is, of course, a consequence of public stigma. And on this stage model of self-stigma, which I found particularly interesting, people start to be aware of the stigma on their condition. They become to agree on the prejudice and stereotype and to apply them to themselves. Then finally, we have the harms in which people decrease significantly their self-esteem and self-efficacy and feel without any hope of doing something to address their issue. So self-stigma is a major distress for people in recovery, because it actually affects particularly those who are considered by the recovery community fundamental elements for recovery, because self-stigma brings people to self-discrimination and self-isolation, so they lose connection. They have negative thoughts, so they lose hope. They identify with the stereotyped identity which is attributed to them as addict, and so they lose their real identity as people, as person. They feel useless, they feel with no meaning in life, and they have low self-esteem and self-efficacy, so they feel totally without any power to determine their life. So this is the white lie effect, generate the white lie effect, because people with self-stigma are always expecting failure from their action. And this is one of the major problems for them. So how can we do in our society to reduce stigma? We have to use a different terminology. Dr. John Kelly made a lot of study around this topic. So we have to use non-stigmatizing and non-punishing terminology, but not too medicalized one, because if we address it in a too medical way, we make another mistake. We have to improve consistently our services, to increase the number, to improve the quality, and to train the staff to be able to address people with substance use disorder without a stigmatizing attitude. We know that professionals are often the first one to stigmatize people who ask them for help. Also, we have to expand the knowledge and to expose general population to people in recovery. Like we have seen in the video by Neil, people in recovery can spread the message of hope and help general population to overcome their stereotype and prejudice. In one word, we have to change our vision on people in recovery and people who use drugs. We should focus on their strengths and not on their weakness. We should focus on people and not on the problem they have. So this is the great difference that we can make to reduce stigma and self-stigma. Now, please let me tell you what we did at San Patrignano to change this culture, to try to address this issue. Since the early 80s, we promoted the creation of parent organization in which families could help each other, could fight stigma and spread hope for themselves and for their loved one in order to be able to help them to take a good decision and start a recovery process. Now we have 42 independent parents organizations that serves currently 3,500 families around Italy. Then what to do for people that ask for help? We saw that to address self-stigma, the best option is to promote personal, individual empowerment. And these are the three pillars that we use at San Patrignano to implement and to help people that want to recover their life back in their own track. A peer-led therapeutic community that build on social interaction, intense interpersonal relationships that can help people to rebuild their life skill and their capacity of relating with other people in a reliable way. Then we have to offer quality vocational training opportunities in order to facilitate their final social reintegration, and also meaningful activity in their spare time, such as sport, culture, volunteer. We know from David Best that people in recovery volunteering up to 70%, if I'm not wrong. So volunteer helping other people, as Patrick also underlined, is very important for people in recovery. And also we have to implement a trauma-informed approach. We know that most of substance use disorder are as root causes pre-existing trauma, ACEs, adverse childhood experience that really causes the people to start using drugs and to continue in developing a substance use disorder. How we do concretely? We take a while for vocational guidance to help people to understand in which direction do they want to address their life, which are their talents. Then they can access formal education in our school or vocational training, or both, a combination of the two. For those who have less possibility to be supported economically by the family, we can offer paid traineeship after the vocational training so that they can save a small amount of money for the final goal, the goal of everyone, which is social reintegration. And we hope that they find welcoming collectivity that welcome them and help them to sustain their recovery. So this is all on my side. Oh no, I would like only to show you some photo. This is our school. This is the number of courses that we offer every year. As you can see, in 2020, because of COVID, they were much less, but then in 2021, we were able to increase the number of different courses. And these are some of the activities in which our people can be trained. Thank you for your attention, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, Monica. Some of the things that you said that stuck with me really were how you're engaging the family and peers in the process of treating people with substance use disorders, but also a call to action to engage people in recovery, to engage people with lived experience in educating our community, in building capacity in our field, and also in our advocacy efforts. What a better population to talk to our community stakeholders and our lawmakers about these issues that we face than people with this lived experience. So thank you so much, Monica. Next, we will hear from Jimena Kalawaski, CCAD Executive Secretariat OAS.
Muchas gracias, Amy, por la invitación. También quiero agradecer a mis compañeros de fortalecimiento institucional de la CICAD que han estado trabajando y organizando este evento. Bueno, realmente tenía una presentación, pero creo que no la voy a usar porque hemos tenido palabras muy inspiradoras en el inicio de esta actividad. Me gustaría un poco poder compartirles lo que pasa en la región de las Américas. Realmente el trabajo, la lucha contra el estigma es un gran desafío que tenemos pendiente. En la región de las Américas muchas veces la temática del consumo de drogas además se une con situaciones de pobreza, por lo tanto la lucha contra el estigma se hace mucho más difícil. Hay muchas barreras de acceso al tratamiento, tampoco hay, como señalaba Patrick, que acá en Estados Unidos no hay cobertura para la asistencia a los programas de tratamiento. En nuestra región todavía la cobertura es insuficiente. Creo que todos los esfuerzos que se hacen y que se han hecho para abordar esta temática deben seguir reforzándose, y es por eso que hemos realizado toda la cantidad de actividades que indicó el embajador Nam al principio de esta sesión, de manera de poder abordar la temática del estigma, porque nos encontramos con un doble desafío. La persona que está consumiendo drogas, por un lado, tiene que preocuparse de abordar su enfermedad, de trabajar en ella, de establecer sus redes de apoyo, lo cual es un enorme desafío, y al mismo tiempo tiene que luchar contra el estigma asociado a esta enfermedad, cosa que no se le pide a otras personas con otro tipo de enfermedades, como por ejemplo la diabetes. Cuando tenemos a alguien diabético, por supuesto que es una persona que recae en el consumo de azúcar, pero no tiene que andar diciéndole a las personas alrededor, miren, esto es lo que ocurre con mi enfermedad, o esta enfermedad no pone en peligro al resto de mi familia porque yo estoy en tratamiento. Entonces, en ese sentido, creo que los desafíos que tenemos son bastante importantes. Por un lado, que la atención en la temática de las adicciones pueda estar inserta dentro de los servicios de salud como cualquier otra enfermedad. En uno de los webinars que tuvimos este año, pudimos ver cómo, por ejemplo, la ubicación espacial o los barrios que se elegía para instalar los programas de tratamiento hacen una diferencia enorme. Cuando un programa de tratamiento en un hospital está al lado de la sección de cardiocirugía o de la sección de tratamiento de enfermedades transmisibles, resulta que las personas que van a tratamiento también se sienten como una persona más que va a tratar cualquier enfermedad y no todo el estigma que tiene asociado a la enfermedad de la adicción, donde aún en muchos de nuestros países, incluso nuestros profesionales todavía siguen pensando que esto es un pecado, una desviación del buen camino, un vicio, etcétera, etcétera. Y por eso va toda esa sanción asociada al consumo de sustancias. Mónica acaba de hablar con bastante énfasis de lo que tiene que ver con el autoestigma, que es cómo la persona que está consumiendo algunas sustancias, también él mismo o ella misma se va excluyendo porque encuentra que su situación es más grave o es peor que alguna otra enfermedad. De hecho, me encanta ver que Patrick recién puso a su hija ahí mirando la pantalla para mostrarnos que hay familia que apoya, hay familia que no apoya también, justamente asociado al estigma, y muchas veces lo que ocurre dentro de las familias, y creo que Patrick lo ilustró muy bien, es esta sombra, esto de ocultar esta realidad que está ocurriendo, y al ocultar esta temática y no hablarla y no enfrentarla y meterla debajo de la alfombra, justamente lo que hacemos es agravar y no pedir ayuda a tiempo. Entonces creo que nuestra invitación y nuestro desafío dentro de la CICAD es justamente poder hacer cada vez más incidencia en normalizar esta enfermedad como muchas otras en las cuales las personas, todos podemos ser vulnerables, todos podemos sufrir, y no es necesario apartar a las personas consumidoras de sustancias, sino que más bien poder ayudarlas a encontrar ayuda y enfrentar esta situación lo antes posible. Dentro del trabajo que hizo San Patrimiano con la CICAD, con las comunidades terapéuticas durante este año, que bueno, el año pasado en realidad con esto de la pandemia los días pasan volando, justamente sacaron unos lineamientos que van en toda la línea de cómo poder fortalecer el trabajo para abordar esta situación de estigma como con muchas otras. Y algunos de ellos los quisiera mencionar, por ejemplo, identificar cuáles son los programas de trabajo que existen en un país o en una comunidad con las poblaciones vulnerables. Porque hemos visto que una de las dificultades que existe en los programas de tratamiento, ya sea que estén ubicados en el sistema público de salud o de gobierno, como en las organizaciones no gubernamentales, es poder coordinar el trabajo entre distintas instituciones y organismos. Entonces, por eso que identificar los programas de trabajo que existen, quienes trabajan con poblaciones vulnerables, quienes trabajan con niños, quienes trabajan con mujeres que consumen sustancias, que además las mujeres tenemos un estigma mayor asociado a la temática de la maternidad, pensando que alguien que consume drogas no puede ejercer bien su rol de maternidad o de paternidad en el caso de los hombres. Poder contar con información de los servicios disponibles al respecto, poder realizar alianzas públicas, privadas, entre distintas organizaciones, para que esta temática se vaya viendo de la manera más normal posible, disminuir las sospechas, las discrepancias, los temores que puede haber ante una persona en recuperación. Poder hacer mucha incidencia, otro lineamiento de Foctali es poder hacer mucha incidencia en la comunidad, y es parte de lo que estamos haciendo en este side event. Hablar de la temática, no esconderla, no decir, uy, qué raro esto que ocurre, sino que esto ocurre a todos, nos ocurre a todos, está en mi familia, está en tu familia, puede estar en la familia de varios de nosotros. Poder proveer de los servicios para las personas más vulnerables, para que puedan tener no solo una atención, un tratamiento, sino que además poder proveer de todo una red de apoyo que va tanto desde el sistema de vivienda, desde la posibilidad de acceder a un trabajo que tenga sentido para esa persona, un trabajo que sea algo que aporte a su vida, no solamente una manera de sustentarse, sino que algo que le dé sentido a su vida, orientación. Y por supuesto, otro de los lineamientos de Foctali que se recopilaron del trabajo con todas las comunidades terapéuticas que participaron de Perú, Argentina, Chile, en este trabajo, justamente fue poder hacer esta suerte de programa o de incidencia en las comunidades y recoger cuáles han sido las mejores experiencias y las experiencias en las que nos hemos equivocado a lo largo del tiempo. Solo me gustaría terminar señalando que hace bastante años atrás, cuando no había una suficiente respuesta de los servicios, los programas de salud para abordar esta temática, lo primero que surge, y es lo que existe hasta el día de hoy, fue los grupos de pares, el trabajo de Alcohólicos Anónimos, luego Narcóticos Anónimos, la conformación de comunidades terapéuticas, han sido líderes en el abordaje desde la consolidación de grupos donde se comparten puntos en común, experiencias en común, que no solamente son las experiencias relacionadas con la adicción, sino que finalmente son las experiencias que tenemos todos como seres humanos, donde tenemos situaciones de trauma, como señaló Mónica anteriormente, de sufrimiento, desafíos, dificultades ante la vida, entre las cuales muchas veces no hablamos porque aún no solamente hay un estigma asociado al consumo de sustancias, sino que hay un estigma asociado a las dificultades de salud mental. Entonces, nuestro desafío dentro de reducción de la demanda de la CICAD, y el desafío que quiero invitarlos a tener pendiente, justamente a hablar este tema, a normalizarlo y ponerlo en todos los foros disponibles. Muchas gracias y muchas felicitaciones y agradecimientos por esta invitación.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you for bringing up the issue of parity again and talking about how, things that we don't sometimes think about, the geography of where our care centers are and how we have inequities in access to care, but how all of those things contributes to the self-stigma that people feel, and how can we help them have that connection, hope, identity, meaning, empowerment that Monica was talking about, if as a society we're showing them that we don't really believe that, because we're placing these centers and places where they can get care that aren't equal to the way we see other diseases. So thank you so much for bringing that up. So next, let me grab my notes because I was so entrenched in that video that I lost them there, that presentation. So now next we are going to, I'd like to welcome David Best from Derby University in the UK. He is our next presenter.
Hi, and if I could get my slides, please, that would be fabulous. So thank you very much, Elisa. So I'm going to start with 4 background details on myself. The first is that I am the son of an alcoholic who never found recovery, and I guess that's inspired lots of my commitment and passion to this field. Secondly, it's nearly 30 years ago I trained as a research psychologist at the Institute of Psychiatry in London, and I've worked in the addictions field pretty much ever since then in various roles and capacities. And the second half of that time, I've focused primarily around recovery. And essentially what I'm going to say is primarily about the 2,500 recovery stories I've collected in that period in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and Canada. So I'm basing my science on effectively the stories of people's successes and their ability to overcome addictions. So, and the fourth, and I guess relevant part of this is that I have focused so much in recent years on recovery capital. And we all know the term, but one of the big challenges with recovery capital has been how poorly operationalized it has been as a term and how weakly we have come to understand it. And in my work, we've tended to categorize recovery capital into 3 broad categories: personal, social, and community, and they are dynamically linked. But the ultimate aim to support people's recovery, and generally the evidence suggests recovery takes around 5 years from initial attempts to stable recovery, is about building internal resources: self-esteem, resilience, coping, communication, self-efficacy. But to do that, what we have is a fundamentally social and societal process that's built on positive social networks and access to community resources. The people who originally coined the term of recovery capital, Cloud and Granfield, in 2008 then started talking about negative recovery capital, and they talked about the barriers that were brought about by things like justice involvement, that were brought about by mental health problems. And they also looked at both age and gender as potential barriers. And so we can easily create a grid, as I've got on here, that says, okay, how does recovery capital link specifically to this concept of positive and negative? And you'll see that there's some internal characteristics that people have that aren't just the inverse of the positive ones. Isolation would be a negative social capital factor, being embedded in networks that are heavily involved in using and offending. And at community level, the exclusion and marginalization from resources. And when we start to think of that in terms of stigma, and Monica mentioned self-stigma, which is the internalization of some of those social and societal factors. And for me, this provokes the question, as always when I think about recovery, is how do we create generalizable rules and metrics? And it seems to me, if you're interested in measuring what stigma is and how people experience stigma, the same dynamic process applies. How are their groups stigmatized and excluded? How are they personally excluded? And how are they structurally excluded? And how do those three things feed into each other? And then as the corollary, how could that be reversed? So to go on to the next slide, please. Oh, back one, please. Yeah, here we go. So for me, that notion of stigma being linked to a combination of self-stigma resulted from group stigma and structural barriers like the impacts of criminal justice involvement, treatment involvement, really involves starting to think about how we use things like connection, positive social connection to create empowerment. And the two things in all my research that predict individual recovery are belonging and meaningful activities. They generate redemption. And particularly for peer groups, they give people that sense of purpose that Patrick spoke about earlier, that redemption of giving back, being part of something that's generative and regenerative. And we know that for people, one of the magical gifts of Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, is their capacity not only to provide guidance, but to provide access to new social supports. And in a much less specific philosophical way, recovery community organizations, or lived experience recovery organizations, as we call them in the UK, offer that chance. And at the community level, it's two things really. One is political change, so reducing legal barriers and structural barriers to access community resources, but also from a ground up level, how we build and identify examples of visible recovery. Peer-based projects are the best single example of allowing and affording people opportunity to volunteering opportunities, to education, to those things that not only create a new identity, but also create access to new resources, new opportunities, the chance to volunteer and give back. And what that also does is it changes the social stigma. It creates those opportunities for mutual aid engagement. And we know that as people change, their social identity changes. And we've just finished a big European study of recovery pathways in the UK, Belgium, and Netherlands. And one of the key things we always find is that the mechanism for reducing stigma and self-stigma is primarily strengths-based. It's not about attempting to reduce stigma on some kind of psychological level. It's about creating new pride-based and strength-based identities and group belongings. And Neil talked and showed the wonderful videos of the recovery games, and they're incredibly inspiring. And at the same time, and now the whole set of Nerf wars have just started in Florida as ways of creating fun-based pro-social activities. All of these things that create those visible recovery identities, those visible strength-based things, recovery coffee shops. In the UK, we have coffee carts going out to promote recovery, social supermarkets. These models that effectively say, where there is social capital, we create community capital. And the recovery community is not here about addressing deficits in communities. It's about building strengths. And social capital leaks. Recovery is contagious, and recovery capital is contagious into groups. Next slide, please, Elisa. And for me, this is a very straightforward model of we build from the personal, the individual capital, up to the social, up to the community. But in this ice cream cone model, all three of these elements interact, the personal, the social, and community. But the key point from this is that it is generative. There are sprinkles. There's a ripple effect. When communities, when recovery grows socially and visibly, the community benefits through something we call collective efficacy. The community develops stronger ties that stops being about recovery, but becomes about community well-being. And events like the recovery games are perfect examples. The example Neil gave there of the lady who was initially scared, we see this over and over again about the leakage of recovery capital into communities. Final slide, please. And for me, this model isn't about a McDonaldization. We talk about ink spots and ice creams that are really about that model of community gain, but also the way that we penetrate communities. The way to challenge stigma is not through tut-tutting about language, but visibly demonstrating how recovery communities come together and create new assets. In my work on life and recovery surveys, one of the things we have shown is that the rates of volunteering among people in long-term recovery are almost exactly double the rates of volunteering among people not in recovery. Being in recovery is not just about returning to where you were beforehand, because most people wouldn't want that. It's about building new strengths and new resources that saturate and seep and have contagion into the wider community. Recovery is a social contagion, and a social contagion that goes beyond recovery populations and is generative in challenging stereotypes, stigma, and exclusion. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, David. It's always such a pleasure to listen to your presentations, always such great information. And many of us on this call work in our communities, or we work for organizations that do things out on the streets in our community. So again, a call to action to all of us to make sure that we are out there actively engaging people with lived experience and people in recovery to work at the community level and at the advocacy level on these drug demand reduction issues that we're also involved in. And also thank you for bringing up the Nerf games in Florida. Florida is not usually brought up for many good things. So as a Floridian here this morning, thank you for highlighting something fun in our state. Thank you. So next up, we've got two more speakers left. So our second to last panelist, I'd like to welcome Candy Lincoln. She is the project manager at NHS Addictions Provider Alliance.
Hi. Sorry, I was going to say it should be Danny. It's going to be Danny Hames who's the chair.
Yes, I'm here. I apologize. I made the classic error with getting the time zones wrong. So, but it's really, really great to be here. So I'm going to share my screen. My name's Danny Hames. I am the chair of the NHS Addiction Provider Alliance, which is based in England. And we are a collaboration of 17 NHS National Health Service providers which provide addiction services in England. So I'm going to talk more specifically about a piece of work, a campaign that we have initiated as the NHS APA around stigma, and I'm going to share an animation which I believe the hosts have and can share on my behalf. So I'll run through my slides and then we'll see the animation. And just to let you know, the animation is available to those who'd like to use it. So so if I just get the slides up, hopefully you can see that. Okay, so hopefully that's up. I'll start a slideshow. Okay. I'm actually trying to start a slideshow, but the Zoom taskbar is getting in the way. So,
right. You should click at the bottom, bottom right.
Oh, okay.
This one. Yeah.
Slideshow. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I used to be able to press F5. and that used to do it, but no more. So so our campaign is termed the Stigma Kills campaign, and it really is about sort of within England and hopefully the UK, acting as a catalyst to try and generate a cross-sector, be that public, independent, NGO, sort of campaign, much similar to similar campaigns we've seen in the fields of HIV and also mental health in the UK. But it's our effort to try and act as a catalyst and drive that. And one of the things that's really positive is, along with other organisations, this campaign is already starting to generate some cross-organisational work, which is really positive. So it's the NHS Addiction Provider Alliance who are the main drivers of the Stigma Kills campaign. What we really were keen to do was create a campaign that didn't speak to people who were already interested or sort of convinced of this. You know, in the UK, I think sometimes we've fallen into the trap of sort of speaking in an echo chamber of our sector, and people actually who have an interest in this, who have an interest in policy and service delivery. And what we're trying to do this campaign is really reach beyond those boundaries, and actually say that, you know, a disorder in terms of gambling, alcohol, or drug use, actually something that it touches many people, and actually the individuals who are affected by that and their families should be treated and receive the same healthcare and public service as anybody else. Which I think sadly is not always the case in the UK. And alongside this, and again this paper is available, we commissioned a report from an NGO called Working With Everyone, who did a range of consultations and produced case studies of people's experiences of primarily using public services. So that was healthcare services, sadly it was also addiction treatment services, criminal justice, and there's some really quite harrowing tales of how people were discriminated against, and I would really recommend taking a look at that report. So the campaign itself. So back in November 2021, we ran a conference about stigma, and it had a range of excellent speakers, including international speakers, Gord Garner from CAPSA and being one example, Dame Carol Black, who's recently led the drug strategy review in England, spoke. It was attended by over 500 people, and it brought together a community of people really actually talking about how stigma affects how people are treated and how they receive services, but also started to galvanize people to come together and sharing ideas. We've run a series of conferences, and in terms of feedback and in terms of almost us stepping forward, it really felt like we stepped forward and really filled a vacuum, and people really responded positively to it. So the campaign itself, Stigma Kills, in a minute you're going to see the animation. There's sort of some key messages that we're pushing forward with this. What the campaign entails is obviously the report, which we're sharing with policymakers, but also it has lots of sort of resources and assets in terms of its communications channels. So the animation's the big one, but we're developing other sort of things which, for instance, could be, we're hoping are going to be used in sort of NHS trusts. So I'll take my example, we've got 8,000 employees, and actually putting materials and a call for change up on screensavers being one example. But asking people to really do the following. Yeah, so, you know, it's the call to action is, as you can see there, stop using the words that hurt and isolate people. Start thinking about why someone might be ill, and ask if they need any help or support. And they are the 3 key messages that we are just pushing and pushing and pushing. And what's really great to see is it is creating dialogue, and it's creating dialogue with individuals and within organizations who don't typically do this work. And, you know, if we're starting to do that, that's a really positive thing. So the next steps are that we're going to be moving into phase 2 of the campaign. We are working with a range of organisations to see about how we can make a sort of a more coordinated cross UK move with that. I think that will include more campaign materials, more calls for change. I think also looking at actually how can we use work that's already been done around language and start trying to influence and inform media about that. In terms of actually the documentation that the health service and organisations within it produce, actually trying to make sure that it's stigma aware. So there's more to come, but some of our key outcomes around starting to create that momentum already seems to be happening, which is excellent. So I believe you're able to share the animation. Is that correct, Candy? But thank you very much. But yeah, if we show the animation, then you get a flavour of what we're doing, and obviously it's available to anyone who'd like to use it. Don't think we have any sound. So yeah, so that's the animation there. I'm not sure if other people could hear the sound, but there's actually audio that goes alongside that. So we're going to put the link to the website where you can also hear the audio as well. But you know, please get in touch and be part of the campaign. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Danny. And sorry about the confusion there. I wasn't paying attention in the chat box when you arrived. I did go on the website. You can't see it, but it's a great website with a lot of good data, some really cool stories. And even though I couldn't hear the video, I'm not sure about other people, but great video, even in silence. I mean, such a great message. And looking at this from the vantage point of a teenager who grew, when I was growing up, had a sister that was using drugs, this would have been a great video for my family, because this was something that we didn't understand. And I certainly didn't understand as a teenager. So I'm sure I wasn't actively building, I was probably actively building that wall as an adolescent instead of crumbling it down. So this is a great resource for people who have family members that are experiencing this. And I think that it would go so far. I know it would have definitely in my family. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing. So we are now at our last speaker in the panel, and it is my great pleasure to introduce my friend, Milka Nisik from Celebrate Recovery in the Baltic region. Milka, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Amy. And I'm so honored and privileged to co-organize this inspiring event. And it's really a challenge to conclude after so many amazing speakers. But what we can all agree on is that it's critical that we always bring together the silence and the lived experience, and to provide this kind of meaningful insight into innovative models and research and challenge stigma among not only people, but also experts. And I really hope that this event will be an inspiration for all to build partnership and to create pathways to reintegration, to celebrate positive examples, and also challenge and overcome stigma by strengthening inclusion of people in recovery. And as we have heard today, stigma and exclusion and marginalization pose a substantial barrier to not only those who are still suffering from addiction, but also to people in recovery, their families, and their children. And people with previous addiction and forensic histories or significant mental health problems, female gender and older age are often significantly more stigmatized and vulnerable, which is also poses a really great obstacle to access to support and social capital and active participation in the community. And they only need appropriate treatment and also gender-sensitive interventions. And I just want to highlight very briefly 4 main recovery messages. And the first one, as we heard also in this today's event, is that recovery is reality, and drug addiction is a recoverable condition. People do recover every day, and in spite of the terrible numbers that we heard in the beginning from Minister, and she shared that there are 36 million of people who are suffering from addiction. But contrary to common opinion and belief, 60% of people with addiction problems who pursue recovery journeys achieve stable recovery. And there are people in natural recovery who never ask for help, and today they live lives without drugs, contributing to their communities. And there are also many of those who have failed many times, but they are still in the recovery process and not giving up to achieve a better life, or in fact, as David said, better than well lives. But also what Patrick said in the beginning, it's time to break the silence and to address stigma as a discriminatory thing and something that undermines social justice in our societies. The second thing I want to highlight is that recovery will only flourish in supportive communities. And that is actually one of our main tasks. We have to allow people to recover and to integrate back to society. And that kind of notion and ecology of recovery in communities has to become the ambience where vulnerable individuals who suffer from addiction will not be stigmatized, and their services they need will be provided to address not only addiction, but also various other problems. For that, we need to know on what to focus. And our focus should not be on the problem of addiction only. We have to switch the way we understand how to make things better by not making a big list of alignments and then trying to tick each of them off one by one. But we rather, like David said, have to focus on that what recovery positively contributes to the communities and bring to the communities, while also building social and community capital. And recovery doesn't happen in acute services, detoxes, or clinics. And to tackle stigma, recovery needs to be moved from specialist treatments into the community and to be visible, attractive, and to be done through structural and community change. The third thing I want to highlight is that people in recovery are not only a problem, but rather they're part of the solution. And like we heard today, in some countries like the UK, people in recovery are not only integrated into society, but they also work in institutions and organizations as recovery coaches, showing these positive examples that it's possible to live a drug-free life. And through these engagements, they have an enormous impact of overall drug problem. And my final point is that women face significant disadvantages within the realm of prevention, treatment, and recovery, but also reintegration services. With the lack of gender-specific and trauma-informed services, like Monica said, these fuel stigmatization, violence against women, and women around the world are hindered from accessing adequate support. So I would say that our main tasks are to put recovery as a primary goal, not only drug treatment, but also in policy, because all of us want to see our communities and our people healthier. And we should focus on strengths and assets of a person and not only on their weaknesses. And our aim for future development would be to build person-centered and gender-specific interventions. And it's high time to acknowledge that not only not only services are important, supportive communities, families, and recovery champions are building recovery-oriented systems of care, and people do recover. So lived experience, peers, best practices are critical in reintegration of individuals, and especially women, and in showcasing that recovery is possible. And with this, Amy, I want to turn back to you again. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you so much for your words and your passion on this issue. And I really am learning myself that recovery is a community event. It's not just an individual thing, but it takes all of us. And we all should be supportive in that process, and we all should be working in that process. So thank you so much. What an incredible event. Such a great lineup of panelists and all of our people who made introductory remarks. Thank you so much for collaborating on this event. I want to thank everybody who attended the event today. It's Friday. It's been a long virtual week of CND. So we so appreciate that you chose to be here with us today. And we thank you for everything that you all are doing in your commitment to champion recovery efforts, ending stigma, and spreading the hope and reality that recovery is real and recovery is possible. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your CND. And before you log off, I think Monica wanted to say a few words.
Very few words, only a big thank to all of you for being so passionate, so full of hope, so full of, I don't know, I am a bit moved, emotional about this panel because it was so full of life, let's say, full of life. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your contribution. It was really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all. Take care.
Nice to see everybody. Have a great weekend.
It was great to have you all. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ambassador Mulka, Danny, Patrick, Neil, Amy, all of you. It was really a great panel, and you will receive the recording of this panel with the link so that you can have it. Also, all the participants will receive their recording of the event. So thank you again.
Thank you, Monica.
It is difficult to leave you.
Yes, it is.
We are a family
Gracias, Monica.
Ciao,
Yes.
Jimena. Great intervention, great speech to you too. It was amazing.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Likewise.